We're going to get going again. Welcome back. Aloha. All right. Should be motivated, fired up. But I tell you, I'm really proud to introduce our next keynote. A tremendous leader. Boy, I feel very honored to have served with him. We've got, of course, General Ron Clark, U.S. Army Pacific Commander, is going to speak to us. You know, he was commissioned in 1988 as an infantry officer and started off as a platoon leader and scout platoon leader in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, right away, you know, off to combat. Amazing experience. Then he would command a whole bunch of different levels: a battalion in the 101st, a brigade at Fort Benning, Georgia, commanded a place called 25th Infantry Division, Tropic Lightning. Fantastic. A bunch of us were here to watch him excel in that command. It was phenomenal. Then off to ARCENT, an easy job there in the Middle East, right? And what a great job at ARCENT. And then most recently he served as Senior Military Assistant to the Secretary of Defense, a critical job. And of course, he holds a BS from the United States Military Academy, an MMAS from U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. But I think the appropriate term, we heard it earlier this morning, but it really applies to Ron Clark, the right leader at the right time. Such a critical time for our nation, everything going on. The absolute right leader at the right time. So, Ron, come on up and wow us here after lunch. We gave you the best spot, you know.
Aloha. Aloha. Best way to get a good intro is to have your old boss do it for you. The guy who's running the whole conference, somebody you've worked for multiple times. And it's also somebody that understands that you're on the mic after them. So anything they say you can refute, because nothing messes up a good story like a war story like a witness. So General Brown, thank you. Appreciate your warm words, appreciate your leadership. Visionary leader for our Army and for our nation. General Brown's an innovator. When he was the commander of the Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Benning, he established a performance enhancement program and resiliency campus at Fort Benning that helped us to help our soldiers better understand how to be ready and resilient for our Army, a precursor to our holistic health and fitness program Deidre Tahan knows very well. But again, no one even talked about that until General Brown brought that to fruition. If you can remember back to the time about 2014, 2015, where the Army was struggling to define its operating concept. We use terms like unknown and unknowable, which means we really don't know how to talk about it. And General Brown said, hey, this is really simple. What we're talking about is operating in multiple domains. Land, air, maritime, cyber, space, multi-domain operations. Now, how did he decide to do that? It's because, again, he's a visionary leader. He commanded the first ever Stryker Brigade to take a capability that was nascent and learn to not only train infantrymen on that mounted platform, but also how to fight it in combat. And he commanded the first Stryker Brigade for 3 years, including a tough deployment to Mosul. So, sir, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your visionary approach to the business of warfighting. And thank you for being a mentor and friend, not just to me, but to a number of us. Round of applause for General Brown. I also want to thank our industry partners for being here and for your efforts to help us to innovate and modernize our forces. I'd also like to thank our neighbors, our partners, our ohana here in Hawaii. Governor Green was with us this morning, staunch supporter of our military. He represents exactly what we need from a partner, from a friend in the state of Hawaii as we continue to work through the opportunities that we have here as a land component. Thanks to the Joint Force. Obviously, Admiral Paparo was here this morning, the commander of Indo-PACOM. But I also want to thank my teammates from the Joint Force, like Lieutenant General Jim Glenn, who just walked in here late. I'm not sure how they let him in, except that he's a Marine, and he probably threatened to storm the beach or something. So Jim, thank you for being here, for representing the Marine Corps as part of the land component, and for your teamwork. Hoorah. It's always a few. I'd like to thank our joint teammates and our combined teammates from our allies and partners from across the region. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your sacrifice, because we know that there are 13 Army chiefs here. There are 33 delegations here, and we know that 2 out of every 3 chiefs of defense in the Pacific is an Army officer. So you understand the importance of land forces, you understand the impact of land power, and it's on display here today. Please, round of applause for our partners from the combined force. To our civilian leadership, Department of the Army, Department of Defense civilians, and our contractor teammates that are here, raise your hand if you're here from Washington, D.C. You're welcome. And thank you for deciding to come back inside. It's a beautiful day out there. I know the beach can be mesmerizing, the ocean, the waves, the surf, but thanks for being here. And again, best weather on the planet. Thank you. To our panelists and keynote speakers, some of whom have already been up here today, thank you for your time and effort in giving a voice to land power and some of the challenges and opportunities that we have here at LANPAC to talk about that. And finally, thank you to the soldiers. Our soldiers who are here today represent our Army, represent the Joint Force, represent the very best of us. They're part of the 1% of our U.S. population that will ever wear a uniform, don the cloth of our nation in her defense. So round of applause for soldiers who are serving our Army today. As we know, the theme of this year's LANPAC is prevailing through land power. And what I'll try to highlight over the next few minutes is some of the things that we're doing over the next few days with some of the panels and some of the discussions and some of the keynotes. But first, I want to introduce the topic by talking about how we prevail as we discuss land power in a joint context. We prevail as part of a joint and combined force. We train together with allies and partners, and we prevail in all domains: land, sea, airspace, cyberspace, and the information environment. It is impossible to create those synergistic effects without all those domains converging together, both traditional and non-traditional. But even today, as we think about our responsibility to prevail, it's land power that comes to the fore. And it's absolutely appropriate that we talk about it in earnest during LANPAC. In a historical context, and General Brown said it this morning and showed a wonderful video on behalf of the Army, we're celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States Army. We're going to host a tremendous celebration here in Honolulu and Waikiki down at Fort DeRussy from the 8th to the 14th of June of this year with various events to celebrate the 250th anniversary and birthday of our Army with our Hawaiian community. Land forces in the United States, both the Army and the Marine Corps, were established in 1775. There's always one. And I'm reminded even now about how the nature of warfare remains timeless. And some of the challenges that the Continental Army worked through during the Revolutionary War are some of the same sort of challenges we're dealing with today. 250 years ago, our allies and partners provided us legitimacy and direct military support. Direct support from France in the terms of naval support at Yorktown, Prussian military training, loans from the Dutch, welcome military pressure on the British from Spain, and not to be lost in this discussion, the indigenous people of the United States, who helped us to understand and leverage both the physical terrain and the human terrain. We fought across multiple domains where we did not have supremacy, and our National Guard, then called militias, our citizen soldiers, were the first to engage the British. They provided the colonies valuable time to develop capabilities and to grow, and proved that we had the will to fight and to die for the cause of freedom. We had to adapt. We were not prepared to fight battles in the European style of warfare, so we had to transform in contact. Most importantly, the Revolutionary War proved that we could prevail through land power, because it was land forces that guaranteed the sovereignty of our new nation, and it was land forces that secured our new borders and our key terrain. But as we pivot to modern times, land power remains relevant in large-scale combat operations. So it's relevant to our challenges here in the Indo-Pacific. Land forces have been significantly important to this region, despite some of the misperceptions that it's simply an air and maritime theater. During the Second World War, land forces repeatedly enabled the Joint Force by seizing air and maritime power projection platforms on the land. It included anchorages, ports, and airfields. Army forces were inclusive of 3 field armies, 6 corps, and 21 divisions that fought in multiple battles in campaigns across the Pacific. Land forces were critical to the Korean War. It was coalition forces, land forces, and Army soldiers and Marines from the Republic of Korea, Australia, and the United States and Canada that fought shoulder to shoulder to secure the sovereignty of the Republic of Korea. It was land forces that established the defensive perimeter of Busan after North Korea invaded the South in 1950. It was land forces that landed, then pushed out of Incheon to cut off North Korean supply lines and push north. And finally, it was land forces that stabilized the front lines around the 38th parallel and preserves the sovereignty of the borders and the people of the Republic of Korea even today. But the United States' last experience in large-scale combat operations is particularly salient to the current operational environment here in the Indo-Pacific. Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. As General Brown said, I was a young lieutenant, a scout platoon leader in the 3rd Armored Division, and proudly served in my first combat deployment as a part of that organization. First, it's important to circle back to how we fight together as a combined joint force with allies and partners from other services. Because during the Gulf War, the joint force was indispensable in facilitating land maneuver. The joint force enabled strategic maneuver by allowing the coalition to position land forces within striking distance of Kuwait as part of Operation Desert Shield. Joint forces also employed capabilities to enable tactical land maneuver through air and maritime superiority, and enabled success on the land with the coalition of the willing. Ultimately, land forces, as a part of a joint force, achieved victory and liberated Kuwait. Success in maneuver during large-scale operations that are facilitated by the joint and multinational force got the attention of our current potential adversary. They used 20 years of our occupation with the global war on terror to conduct a historic and breathtaking modernization of their own armed forces. And in many ways, because of our success and the success of our joint force and successful coalition warfare, they've taken measures to try to prevent that from happening again. It's because of our relationships built on trust. It's because of our ability to control air, maritime, and other domains that enabled us to project power, as the previous panel discussed, from the land to fight and win. The Gulf War was the traditional pattern. They understood that because they know that land forces seize terrain, they protect borders, they ensure sovereignty. So that brings us to the shift in the paradigm for the access of our forces in combat in our current environment. Today, our adversary is very different than what we faced over the past 20-plus years. He's developed an anti-access area denial network designed to fix our air and maritime assets and to put them at risk. They will not allow us to build combat power at our own time and choosing inside of their anti-access area denial bubble. So our mission, our responsibility, is to understand that threat and attempt to neutralize their ability to impact our other domains. They have the ability to mass, amphibious forces, naval forces. They have the ability to support them with organic fires from within their own borders. And they've developed magazine depth that can support forces at extended range and durations across the first and second island chains as they attempt to contest the sovereignty of many of our neighbors and allies. Their actions have been repeatedly and increasingly aggressive, belligerent, and coercive. And ladies and gentlemen, these challenges are real. They intend to contest the joint force in the air, maritime, land, space, and cyber domains in a way that we've never seen before. So how do we counter that threat? How do we answer that challenge? Where are our opportunities? We will prevail through combined joint all-domain operations on and from the land. It's not simply a U.S. concept. Multiple of our allies and partners have embraced the need for pulsed operations to leverage multi-domain effects to create access for the joint force. But again, that happens through land power. The definition of multi-domain operations is the art of moving forces to create positional advantage. And positional advantage remains the central idea of the USARPAC strategy. We must retain the ability to successfully prosecute multi-domain operations as part of a joint multinational force to gain positional advantage to prevail in combat. The security architecture that binds this region together is seated at the front right of this auditorium. It's the Strategic Land Power Network. That network provides the bonds built on a bedrock of trust in a multinational way to respond to any crisis. The bonds we build during LANPAC and during our exercises, operations, activities, and investments across the theater build trust. What we learned from the Coalition of the Willing during the Gulf War and during our GWAT operations is that on the land, in planning conferences, basing an overflight of the land, in our efforts and initiatives together is really the leverage that we retain with our land power network. Whether it's the 44th iteration of Exercise Cobra Gold, where 30 countries participated in the largest exercise on the Asian continent, where we executed joint and combined forcible entry and maritime strike from the land, or if it's maintaining a combat-ready force as a part of United Nations Command Korea, or if it's Yamasakura, where we exercise C2 nodes commanding joint and multinational forces stretched across 17 countries, or 17 time zones in multiple countries, featuring groundbreaking multi-domain command experimentation, or PAC Sentry, Balikatan, Talisman Sabre, or a JPMRC rotation. What makes this possible is the Strategic Land Power Network. Our ability to be able to work together in time and space with our allies and partners on the land. Combined, joint, and all-domain operations also require us to campaign forward. When we apply combat power on key terrain during rehearsals for potential operations in crisis or conflict, it's the land power network that pulls that together. We increase our interoperability 3 ways. We understand that doctrinally. We're interoperable through human-to-human interaction, through our ability to work procedurally with one another, and through our technical capabilities. The rehearsals we conduct during our operations activities and investments are how we get at interoperability completely. As Admiral Paparo talked about earlier, campaigning with land power provides us the ability to place exquisite capabilities forward to deter. Those capabilities recently include our ability to move mid-range capability into the Philippines, to provide capability to a treaty ally who's being threatened by our adversary in a way that prevents them from being able to enjoy their own sovereign territory without, again, pushing back on those aggressive, belligerent, and coercive activities of the Chinese. Our ability to deploy HIMARS through high rain at a time and place of our choosing, the Marine Corps with Nemesis and the littoral combat regiments to be able to impact and hold at risk our adversaries in the air and maritime domains from the land. Those activities are clear, they have a deterrent effect, and most importantly, they enable the joint force. In addition, these capabilities create multiple dilemmas for our potential adversaries. They're hard to find, they're camouflaged, they're easily dispersed, they're highly survivable, and they can target and deliver capabilities at scale from multiple domains. They literally are designed to pierce the A2AD bubble. And with positional advantage, at the invitation of our partners and allies, we can be at range at a time and place of our choosing. These capabilities provide us a window of opportunity to facilitate the maneuver of the joint force that's required to have the air and maritime domains be relevant, ready, and execute based on plans going forward. We're also setting the theater through the joint force. The previous panel talked about this in great detail. The Army and the Strategic Land Power Network and its vast nature and networks across the Indo-Pacific are who sets the theater for the joint force. It's the land power that we display here that moves personnel, equipment from all the services, from fort to port, and from port to place of need at time and place of our choosing. It's land power that establishes and maintains supply chains for food, ammunition, fuel, especially in austere environments in the Indo-Pacific. We had the good fortune of having 2 former U.S. Indo-PACOM J4s in the last panel. They planned a sweat MS analysis, if you will, of every feature that's a high tide rock outcropping of any kind in the Pacific to determine what capabilities are resident, what capabilities are needed, should we have to deploy or move the joint force across the theater, given the tyranny of distance, to operate inside the decision cycle of our adversary. It's land power that maintains and prepares equipment for other services. It's land power that builds and repairs bridges, runways, ports that are required to synchronize and operate and maneuver. It's LANPAC that establishes medical support forward in support of the Joint Force. We establish, secure, and maintain joint bases throughout the region that manage ports for all the branches of service. LANPAC has demonstrated its ability and capability historically, and it demonstrates its value in this theater today. The value of our LANPAC network provides the Joint Force access, campaigning forward, and maintains relationships. 3 priorities at USARPAC: people, partnerships, with the mission to prevail. LANPAC opens those windows of opportunity that allows us to meet, to partner, and to win. So as a part of the Joint Force and a proud member of the Strategic LANPAC Network, thank you. Thank you for allowing us as partners to converge on the idea of readiness, LANPAC that deters. Thank you for allowing us to work together for stability and security and laying the groundwork for the prosperity of all of our nations. May God continue to bless our soldiers, civilians, and their families. May God continue to bless everyone assembled here. Aloha and mahalo.
Thanks again, sir. Great remarks. As our panel comes to take their seats, this panel brings together a wealth of experience and diverse perspectives on land forces. The topic of discussion is ready, lethal, and resilient, generating ready armed forces. To moderate this discussion, we have Lieutenant General J.D. Johnson, U.S. Army retired, Vice President of Government Solutions and Strategy, GM Defense. Lieutenant General Johnson is responsible for identifying growth opportunities among military and government customers that align with the company's core capabilities, including integrated vehicles, power, and propulsion and mobility and autonomy. He spent more than 35 years in the Army with extensive overseas tours, including combat operations in Iraq. He held numerous positions at DoD, including the Director of the Joint Improvised Defeat Organization and the 8th Army Commander in the Republic of Korea. J.D., the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir, and welcome everybody. I think you're going to find this panel is a discussion that will start today, but it'll continue throughout LANPAC and frankly well beyond LANPAC. We've got a distinguished group of participants in the panel today, as General Smith said, that come from a very wide background of experiences and in their current jobs. General Brown, General Clark, thank you so much for the invitation to be here and get the chance to talk. Our international general officers and others that are gathered here, thank you for your participation today. Sergeant Major Daly, always great to have you here and look forward to your participation in this as well. We're obviously not going to go through the backgrounds and histories of the participants, but I do want to make sure everybody understands the jobs that they currently hold. So General J.B. Val is currently the Deputy Commanding General, U.S. Army Pacific. To his right, yeah, absolutely. To his right is General Jim Glenn, Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces Pacific. To his right is Major General Hope Rampey, who's the Commanding General of the United States Army Human Resources Command. And then the anchor on this panel is Ms. Susie Varas-Lum, who's the Director of the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off kind of setting the table, and each one of the participants in the panel will talk about from their perspective what's really important to understand up front about generating ready land forces. Then we'll get into a discussion, a dialogue among the participants here. Then we'll open it up for you and the questions that you may have or comments that you may have to contribute to this. And then the participants will finish it out in the end. So we'll start and we'll just go to my right and across the panel here with opening comments.
Thanks, JD. So just starting with the place where General Clark left off with in his last keynote, and using the title of the panel, I'll just go with kind of a rubric of ready, lethal, and resilient. And what does that mean for land power in the Indo-Pacific? So I'd start off with, of course, the Army as the foundation of the joint force is essential in the Indo-Pacific. And so what is ready, what does lethal, and what does resilient actually mean? What do we have to do to achieve that? So point one, ready. We think about it tactically. Are we ready with our kit, our soldiers, our capabilities at individual leader and collective levels to win and fight tonight? We have to do that every day. Prime example in Korea, 8th Army right now working with the ROCs, making sure we have deterrence and, if able or needed, ready with capable forces on the DMZ or wherever we need to be fighting. It's more than that, though. It's the shoot, move, communicate, sustain, and protect that we have to do at tactical levels every day. It doesn't matter if we're doing multi-domain operations. You got to put the face paint on, you got to put in the reps and sets, and that gets you the ready capability in your formations as an individual, as a leader, and as an organization for whatever mission that happens. It's your kit. It's how well it's maintained. That has not changed, regardless of the changing characteristics of the 21st century. So we define that readiness as if you're ready to use your kit, you have the best trained and prepared formations that you could possibly have, and they're aware of their environment and have the tools with which to fight this multi-domain operations environment that we have in the Indo-Pacific against myriad threats. That is important for readiness. So the basic understanding of what that means to us has not actually changed. Point two, lethality. Okay, everybody wants us to kill people. That's what we do at 3 o'clock in the morning very well. We've got companies, battalions, squadrons, brigades that can close with, capture, or destroy the enemy and repel his counterattack by fire. We seize, clear, secure terrain. We do it in all types of environments, from Arctic, high altitude, desert, jungle, archipelagic, and urban environments, all in this massive theater. We have to be ready for those. We have to be lethal. We have to kill people for a living and apply controlled violence when our National Command Authority asks us to do that. But are you firing your rifle more often than you sing the Army song every week? Probably not. Are you shooting, moving, communicating as often as you need to be to practice those capabilities at the tactical level? Are you lethal? At the operational level, we're providing capabilities inside of USARPAC. General Clark mentioned the mid-range capabilities where we can shoot Tomahawk land attack and maritime strike missiles, SM-6, at various ranges that affect operational targets, either land, sea, from on the land inside the A2AD network, where only land power can fracture from within. That's the defeat mechanism. China and other countries have built an anti-access area defeat mechanism that accounts for maritime and air targets, but not for dispersed groups of soldiers and Marines inside of that bubble, fracturing from within. From a lethality standpoint, we have new capabilities. We're in that mid-range and long-range missile business, to include hypersonic capabilities as examples. Thirdly, resilience. I'll start with a vignette. I was at Lalo Airfield in northern Luzon a few weeks ago as part of Balikatan, where with one field of view, I have 2 C-130s, engine running offload, engine running onload, Marines, Army reservists for surgical resuscitative detachments, Army aircraft out the wazoo, lots of Chinooks and lots of Blackhawks at this farther northern airfield, projecting combat power and air assaults across open water 150 kilometers away to Bosco and Ipayat Islands. Resilient because we set the sustainment architecture. Resilient because we're working with our partners and allies. Resilient because we were truly a joint force on the ground and where overlapping capabilities meet in that Venn diagram in one field of view. And oh, by the way, our friends in the PRC and the PLA Navy put 12 surface combatants against us with CV-17 and auxiliary general intelligence gathering, just watching what we were doing, knowing that that's important. That's ready, that's lethal, and the resilience that we have to have in the theater. And the last thing on resilience I would tell you, and you've had the sustainment experts talk earlier, is we're investing in the sustainment architecture with pre-positioning, with our distribution nodes from Japan, from Philippines, from Australia, from Saipan, and from Singapore, to be able to have pre-position capabilities for us. We have options. We're all about optionality, not pinning our bosses and command authorities into a corner. And USARPAC is very invested, understands the lessons from Ukraine of protracted conflict, sustainment over time. We have to be able to have the endurance and stamina as a formation to help the joint force. Thanks.
General Val, thank you very much. General Glenn.
So if you follow General Clark and General Val and you're going to talk about ready, lethal, and resilient, what else do you say? Yes? I mean, absolutely. I'll talk a little bit about it, but I want to start with Sergeant Major Daly and General Brown and AUSA, all the organizers, all the folks that put energy into making this happen. Thanks for inviting a couple Marines, some that'll make noise, some that'll, you know, just good teammates. When you get right down to it, right, and you just said it, buddy, the relationships are what come out of here. I enjoy seeing the technology. I enjoy connecting with old friends in different uniforms. But, you know, as the U.S. military does it, there's something about trying to sleep on the tail of a C-17 as capstone mates that forges bonds that become friendships, that become partnerships. And somehow, some way, nobody on that C-17 said future MARFOR-PAC, future USARPAC, by the way, when the two of us were back there. Absolutely, still not saying it. Yeah, not believing it. Anyway, just really thankful for the opportunity to spend some time with you both this morning on a panel and over the course of the next couple days. A lot of good friends in the audience, like-minded folks, and I think just to neck it down to kind of the ready part, first and foremost, and General Clark said it. We've been after this transformational journey. You call it transformation in contact. Got a great brief yesterday from the 25th IDCG, updating. You know, we're in year 5 of it, and I'll tell you what I've learned from what we call our campaign of learning. It starts and ends with a Marine and the soldier. The kit matters to a point, and then it doesn't. And no matter what we field, no matter how we field it, you know the deal. We're going to get feedback that says, that thing sucks. And I'm going to keep it and break it and tell you how to make it better. But if you give me another one of those again, we're going to have a problem. And so from a readiness perspective, that's what's keeping us sharp. Sharp enough to say lethal? Absolutely. What did Admiral Paparo? Capability and will. Collectively, possess the capability and 100% have the will, and we'll use it and are posturing ourselves in places to make it abundantly clear. And as JB just said, 15,000 of us collectively from a number of countries, the US and Philippines, significant, Japan, Australia, very significant, demonstrating the willingness to use it. And in a media event, when I was there for the opening ceremonies, we were asked 6 times, me and my Philippine counterpart, is this about the Taiwan Strait? And you can imagine that we're not really in a position to answer yes or no. What we said was, this is about honoring the mutual defense agreements between our countries, but trust me, anything we can do in the coastal defensive areas of this country, we can project into any part of the region. And that remains the point, I believe, for all of us. So lethal, yes. And working on getting stronger as it relates. One of the most interesting parts of this job that I didn't anticipate was, in addition to being the MAR-4 PAC commander, I'm the Deputy Joint Task Force Commander for the JTF that PAC Fleet heads. And we spent a lot of time a couple months ago, and are getting ready to, here in a couple weeks, focused on the lethal part of joint warfighting in this region, in our most pressing scenarios. And the one thing I'll tell you is, for those of you, you don't have to show of hands, but those of you that have a fire support coordination background and have spent some time in NCTC and thought you really earned your keep as the Combined Arms Coordination Team, imagine pulsed operations that stretch from space to subsea. And the many domains in there, the systems that exist in those domains, how quickly they're proliferating. For our industry partners, words that you never thought would come out of a grunt's mouth, the data transmission layer and interface, I barely know what those mean, but I've become acutely, right? You were on the panel this morning, I see you shaking your head over there, absolutely. The complexity of it, and yet I sleep really well because I'm looking at the first Corps commander here, because you and I know we have E4s, E5s, E9s, give credit to a couple warrant officers and some captains and majors that bring tears to my eyes with their technical knowledge of things that I don't want to learn any more about. I don't think I have the capacity to absorb much more of it, but I'm just grateful that this is the joint force that is figuring out how to close kill webs. And boy, I don't want to be on the other end of this. And I pray that those paying attention to us decide they don't want to be on the other end of it either. Resilient. The ability to withstand the stresses and withhold. Because you hit so many great ones, I'm going to highlight one. And AUSA, you talked about it this morning, taking care of our families. Like, to everybody out there, thank you. Governor Green this morning, everybody else, this line of work we know takes an immense amount of sacrifice. And without organizations like AUSA, or in our case, the Marine Corps Association Foundation, without a bunch of other enterprises, hard-hitting uniform members, spouses who commit to, when you get right down to it, that's from where I sit every day, that's where the resilience comes from. We'll take care of the equipment. We'll take care of the soldier, airman, sailor, Marine, Guardian. We'll take care of that part of it. It does take a team, but taking care of the families. The resilience. I was talking to mine last night, and just super grateful for all that organizations like yours and others do to contribute to that resilience, so that the folks that we have the privilege of leading every day are focused on exactly what we need them focused on, which was the first 2 points that we've all made. So look forward to your questions. Thanks.
General Glenn, thank you very much. General Rampey.
All right, thank you. And again, I echo my thanks to AUSA and to USARPAC for the opportunity to be a part of today's discussion. And really, I just want to talk about readiness, kind of highlighting what it means. And the Army's about people, and we don't have readiness without people. It is our primary platform. You can't have a lethal warfighting capability without a soldier. And so really, when we look at soldiers and what we've provided over the last 250 years, that people placemat is changing, that landscape is changing in how we manage talent, how we retain, and how we recruit, both now and for the future force. And so as we celebrate 250 years of service and we think, how do we continue to deliver warfighting capabilities when we're at a point where our active component in strength is the smallest it's been since 1940. At the same time, our global demand is increasing, and yet the Army always delivers. But how we deliver becomes more important right now, and we do that through precision and priority MOSs when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to retention, and also in our manning guidance. I might not always be the most popular person in the Army because I get to assign people or not assign them to some units. But through that precision, it allows us to focus on where do we need to have ready soldiers, right place, right time, right specialty in the right unit in order to face our adversaries, and we continue to deliver. And so I look forward to the discussion on how we continue to contribute to that readiness discussion, how that lends to lethality when we look at our priority MOSs, but also when it comes to managing that landscape, and it comes to choice right now. And a lot of times we want to say, hey, you go where the Army sends you, but we also have to get them in the door. And so when it comes to getting someone in the door, it's offering opportunities that no other place can offer like the Army. And that is showing through choice, you too can contribute to the readiness in defense of our nation and continue to tell the story and be part of the next 250 years. Thank you.
Thank you, General Lampy. And Ms. Varas-Lam, please.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, General Clark, General Brown, and all of our distinguished panelists here. I just want to echo something that you've all said, General Clark. You talked about people, partnerships, capability, and all of you highlighted how that's so important, especially personnel, on creating a ready, lethal, and resilient force. I would say that the most important part of capability is not just the kit, like General Glenn said, it's the people. And investing in our people, we know that professional military education is critical. And sometimes we have to look at how we do this. And I would say about 30 years ago, a warrior and statesman, Senator Daniel K. Inouye, also Captain Inouye, Medal of Honor recipient, said that we needed a place, and many of you in here have met him and know him, I see you nodding your heads, that there needed to be a place where we bring together U.S. allies and partners from the Asia and the Pacific region and beyond to come together to talk about those key critical issues that you heard General Clark talk about. How do we create these partnerships? And just as an example, you know, we have 16,000 alumni after 30 years. So if I may, General Brown, ask the audience, how many in here are alumni of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies? If you don't mind putting your hand up, and if you could just look around in this room alone. No, thank you. Thanks for showing that and demonstrating that just in this room, and that's throughout this region. He had this vision that we would invest and that we would have this model that's very unique, that's very agile, able to address those issues that were talked about this morning by Admiral Paparo. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about what is the model that we use. Just as an example, you know, this current course we have is a comprehensive security course with over 100 fellows from around the region and the world from 40 countries, including India and Pakistan in this class from the Army of Pakistan and India. Imagine that, given what's happening right now. What a great opportunity for them to talk about how do they view the solution sets, what's happening right now. And so how do we solve problems? How do we create critical thinking? How do we imagine not just having the sage on the stage impart knowledge about South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, but you have the people in that group who are from that region, who can talk about it together, who can give their input. And that's what makes the special secret sauce of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. And I know you all want to sign up now. You can check out our website.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first off, I think you can see the wisdom AUSA had in bringing this group together, coming at it, this discussion from so many different perspectives. So let's dig a little bit deeper. And I'd like to go to General Glenn right off the bat. So MARFOR-PAC has adapted its operational approach. And can you talk about the initiatives that you've got underway to get after these issues that we've been talking about in MARFOR-PAC?
Well, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to open up. And I think where I'll start is, I mentioned we're year 5 going on year 6 of this adaptation, and this guy by the name of Dave Berger, who became the Commandant of the Marine Corps, sat probably on a stage like this alongside some of you, and had been in this role and just kind of looked at the landscape of how things were changing. And in addition to some of the equipment, and I'll talk a little bit about, but there's a lot of alignment between our service concepts when it comes to like sensing and making sense and being able to close the targeting aspect of closing a find, fix, finish loop, if you will. But the notion that if you could be sensed, you could be targeted, as you know, our adversary had studied all that we had been doing in the Middle East for all these years and had concluded that the first thing we had to do was make some decisions about the size of the unit and how that unit would operate just as a service, let alone as part of a joint force. And so that's kind of the journey that we've been on over the course of the last 5 years. Some of the major changes we've made, first and foremost, with like what is assigned to this theater. We now have 2 Marine Expeditionary Force, is a totality of about 77,000 Marines assigned to Indo-PACOM, and so that provides a lot of that's 2 core level headquarters that Admiral Paparo has at his disposal, and my job is to advise him on how those are utilized. And we are, quite honestly, in varying stages of modernization within those 2 formations. And as all of you know, there's a 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force on the East Coast, which is at a different stage. And so it puts us on, as I opened up, on this campaign of learning that allows us to field a piece of equipment, and for example, a ground sensor, and train Marines on how to use that ground sensor and turn them loose. Turn them loose in the theater, frankly, in the first island chain, and give us feedback on how effective is that commercial off-the-shelf sensor. In this case, it's frankly a commercial fishing radar. And if I migrate that to 5 years later, and what we were just doing, experimentally, but between us, Army and Marine Corps in Bala-Katan, the high altitude balloon. Right? Come to find out, ground-based sensors do a lot better the higher up in the air they are. Like, I don't think it took a Marine infantry squad to figure that out, but that's kind of some of the feedback given what we gave them in the first place and where we find ourselves collaborating, sharing information and feedback. So that's one thing. Then what those formations are, right? General Clark alluded to the Marine Littoral Regiment. No regiment in the Marine Corps prior to this time had its own inherent, for example, air defense and tactical air control element, the ability to handle a set of airspace. And for all the reasons you can imagine, now they do. And not only do they possess that, but again, not strikingly dissimilar for how the MTTF has navigated its way. They also possess an increasing capability from a cyber perspective and a growing awareness informed by space-based operations. And I'll stop there to say that while we envisioned some of that as it began 5 years ago, some of it wasn't realizable. Like the space-based operations and the expertise, at least in our service, didn't exist yet. And thanks to cooperation, thankfully, between the Joint Force, Army and Air Force specifically, and with the creation of the Space Force, that has proliferated very, very quickly. And for those of you that haven't touched in a while, I will say, like cyber and space, much faster than what I would categorize as decades of progress to get us to where we need to be in the electromagnetic spectrum, the EW world, which is another capability that now fielded down to a layer of contact that is really meaningful, that frankly has just, back to my point about fires control, battalion commanders today now have to think through, and for my teammates to the right, I'm setting you up for, I think where we're now catching up as a service and we're really making some strides is in both our assignments and our education and training, where folks aren't just getting this through on-the-job training, which is frankly what it had been for probably the first 2 or 3 years. Now we have systems that are producing folks with knowledge and a set of experience that allows us to plug them right into these formations and be impactful. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, General Val, can you build on that a little bit? Talk about USARPAC and how USARPAC's positioning to build ready.
Absolutely. To riff on this, and I'll start with acknowledging we have some multi-domain task force commanders in the room, and probably the father of the multi-domain task force, Bob Brown from 17, shooting missiles at PMRF with 17 fires. I remember those days. Was an abstract concept for multi-domain battle, we called it at the time. But likewise, experimenting, innovating at the tactical and knife edge of freedom with a bunch of things. Now, the Army did have space, the Army did have cyber capabilities, but at one point we were going to assign an attack aviation battalion in this thing. So we've gone through some organic organizational design and redesign and innovate, find out where we are today with exquisite space, cyber, electromagnetic information operations capability resident. Where the MLRs differ from the Army's MDTF and complementary contributions. MLRs, Jim, correct me, helping the surface fleet through key terrain, working for the fleet, getting to where they need to go. The MDTFs are more of a theater strategic capability that has strategic weapons and tactical capabilities that help the Joint Task Force or the Joint Force Commander fracture open those A2AD bubbles in a much more broad way. So there's a complementary capability that we have with each other. But very, very similar. We talked about the campaign plan for USARPAC. You know it as pathways. Please leave the room today and take the word exercise and strike through it. That's not what it is. It's about interoperability with our partners, our complementary, synergistic, compounded combat power that comes from our allies and partners in the LANPAC network. And that campaign provides human, technical, and procedural interoperability. And so we're talking about the innovation that First Corps and downtrace units and the MDTFs are doing. They're working with allies and partners, working through issues. You'd think in this theater, after so many years of doing this, we could talk to each other and share data. This is not NATO standards. We have bilateral information sharing agreements that we have to work through that are somewhat challenging. We're still not there yet. But we've got at the tactical edge soldiers in our transformation formations, particularly 25th Infantry Division, and our multi-domain task forces are filling requirement gaps that we have at the edge. We at USARPAC are trying to help them through what we have as a concepts council, the only one the Army has at the Army Service Component Command level, to tie and bridge the S&T environment and acquisition with the requirements from the tactical and operational units, bridge that gap so we don't have a 15-year acquisition program for something we can field within a year or two. Example one, we have a huge ISR gap in medium-range ISR for the brigades. You've got to be able to see out to more than 100 kilometers to do targeting with the munitions that we have. Think HIMARS. We can't see that far to shoot that far. That's pretty dumb. We have a capability that's lethal, but it ain't lethal if you can't see it, detect it, track it, target it, hit it, and then assess it, and then reattack. We've got capabilities right now that 1st MDTF and 3rd are fielding forward in the 1st island chain that has days and days of loader time, 30, 50, 100-pound payload capabilities. We're providing that input back to Army to accelerate those programs. So working within the system, accelerating from the bottom up ideas, top down refinement is where we think we found a sweet spot and are working at. The Army's transformation initiative just recently announced and supported by the Secretary of Defense directing the Army to focus on multi-domain task forces innovating at the cutting edge is very reinforcing and supportive of the efforts to where we can help General Clark organize its formations with support from the Army that's supportive of our innovation and creativity forward, and then feeding that back into the system so we can have industry that has technologically competent solutions, rapidly accelerate that fielding, fail fast, learn fast, go at it again, and so we hit that cycle much faster than did we hit milestone B, did we hit milestone C. Those are still important. I'm not advocating something different. I'm just advocating something inside of that. We found success there from our soldiers, our Marines on the ground figuring this out. Last vignette, so it hits home. There was something called an EFP, still exists, explosively formed projectile IED in Iraq. Copper disc, 5-6 inches, conical shape behind an explosive charge, creates a plasma of copper that goes through armored vehicles. Killed a lot of my friends and a lot of yours, or injured them. PIR, IR initiated. So it would find the heat of the engine of the car, the Humvee, and it would kill everybody in the cab. It took a sergeant in a motor pool one day to figure out if I weld an 8-foot metal bar on the front of my Humvee, take a 50 cal ammo box full of charcoal, light it on fire, close it, and then drive, I have 6 hours of heat in front of the vehicle. So we pre-detonated a lot of EFPs in Iraq. That didn't come from the Army. That didn't come from the acquisition community. That innovation, unfortunately, was founded on wounded, injured, and dead soldiers. We don't want to have to be in that position again, where the impetus to adapt to that challenge and that lethality from our adversary is causing us at the tactical edge to lose soldiers to learn. We'd rather do it now, where we have the opportunity to do that. But the same theory exists. Have troops forward, working with science advisors and industry to accelerate the rapid pace of change to address that set of changing characteristics of 21st warfare, where we are now in an era of persistent surveillance. You can be seen, you can be targeted, and that's hard for the enemy to go after disaggregated groups of Army folks, but it's not hard to go after platforms if you're committing the sin of concentrating your forces without the virtue of massing when you need to do it.
So two really important points, lots of important points, but two that I'd like to draw on real quick. So General Glenn talked about the importance of education, in the process. General Val talked about, we can't talk to each other and how we work to it. So there's a point at which you start with the way people think. And so, Ms. Vargas-Lum, could you talk about the educational model that starts taking on how we collectively, us, our partners, allies, across the services, think in a way that supports the concepts that the two general officers have been talking about?
Absolutely. I think interoperability that you've all been talking about and the critical thinking that's required of our warriors, it doesn't happen at the moment of connecting. We know there's about 120, if you look at Admiral Paparo's posture statement, 120 joint exercises just in 1 year. And oftentimes we have our allies and partner soldiers that come together then, and they're actually executing. When do you have time to stop and think and reflect in an environment that allows you to do so, that's built on trust? Because trust is built over time. And I think that is the model and the reason behind the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. In a location here in Hawaii, at Waikiki, it was intentionally selected here because you've got the Indo-PACOM headquarters, you've got U.S. Army Pacific all located here. Within a 6-mile radius of that headquarters are all the other service components. So Hawaii made sense. It is a bridge to the rest of the region, so location, and also the type of recruiting that we do. So we educate with a very specific way of looking at recruiting mid-career leaders to high-end leaders. So we have that educate portion, are very looking at those future leaders, those future change makers, and those who are already in positions of leadership. And then, of course, connecting. You've all talked about the network, and that network is so critical, but again, that takes time. The ability to make that 5-minute phone call that took years to develop, that I know happens in here. I have heard many, many times that many of our leaders, and I believe General Clark as well, has met with other leaders, chiefs of defense that have come from the region and be able to have a conversation. And the commonality they have is this common experience here in Hawaii. And of course, empowering. So educate, connect, empower are the ways that we look at it. That empowerment comes not just from talking about the issues, admiring the issues. Oftentimes we just talk about it, but actually figuring out the solutions that are different for every nation. And what was amazing, this particular course, when we have the mixer initially, I asked them, what are you going to do your fellows project on? They're here for 5 weeks. They're living together in the hotel here in Waikiki. They're coming together, eating together, playing volleyball tomorrow together at Bellows. But it's those kinds of things that allow them to bond. But I asked them, and many of them, it ranged from developing cyber strategy and their cyber policy for their country to figuring out how they do organizational training in their army, in their unit, how they look at logistics, cyber policy, that seems to be a trend. And again, as I mentioned, a pretty significant nation, cyber space policy starting. And we also just sent a team to the Philippines for the national security strategy implementation that actually started at APCSS. So in this environment, you can create those solutions that you need. And that's, we hope to continue that. But that model of strategic recruiting, environment of trust, the non-attribution policy that we have has been very successful in allowing people to be very frank about how they view. I've had very frank questions about changing of U.S. policy. How do we fit into that? But unless we can talk about it really frankly, I don't think that we can move forward in building that trust. And APCSS has been doing that for 30 years. And of course, the other piece is the alumni base. So strategic recruiting, amazing courses that help us have the perspectives that we need, and then the alumni base that's activated. Not just alumni wearing this beautiful lanyard. It's coveted, by the way. Not anybody can get it. You have to actually come through our courses. But it is that activation of alumni, communities of interest that we want to move towards. How can we build, those who are in cyberspace, looking at emerging technologies like AI, creating those communities of interest? We want to activate those, and that's kind of in our strategy right now that we want to move forward. So that model is very effective, and we see it, of course, partnering with other professional military institutions. The Army War College, for one, they provide fellows with us, and they bring their international fellows as well and get to ask the very challenging questions in the non-attribution environment.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting. Each one of you in a different way touched on the very sophisticated kind of people that we have to have in the U.S. military and with our allies. How do we get after recruiting the right people and then developing that talent to be able to do the things we've talked about here?
Right, and I really think even before we worry about recruiting is how do I identify the talent we already have? Yeah. And I think we've struggled with that. And part of, I think, empowering is on a personal and a professional level. The Army now has a command assessment program, but that's just the beginning. So we've had different assessment programs, whether it's an Athena project or something that we've had down at the company grade level. But really we're looking at that assessment ecosystem and how do we start that early and often throughout your career. So when you say, I'm trying to identify that strategic talent, I already have those knowledge, skills, and behaviors. Yeah. I have the data that I can screen for. You already have this resident in our Army. And part of that goes back to even providing that readiness and that resiliency. And I was thinking resiliency, agility when you're talking about transforming in contact. And that it took a sergeant already in the Army to identify a solution to an operational issue. And where else is that sergeant in our force right now, and we just don't know. And so really looking at how do you identify and provide that feedback, both from a cognitive perspective, providing personal feedback, so it's not just about what I professionally can see at Human Resources Command, to provide you a list of those strategic thinkers that should be coming through and getting one of those cool lanyards. I'm going to try and steal one. But being able to say this is resident already in our Army and being smart about it, rather than right now I can name 15 different assessments and maybe 5 different centers that are focused on that. And what we're trying to do is, as we establish the assessment directorate at Human Resources Command, is pull that ecosystem together and be able to deliver not only battalion command, brigade commanders, command sergeants major, that I know here's their cognitive ability and here's the propensity that they have to lead that formation. But really at the lieutenant, the captain level, at the senior non-commissioned officer level, who are those thinkers that are going to think outside the box, and not just because they want a cool lanyard, but they're the right person to have getting that type of education.
I'd like to come back to you, Susie, and talk for a minute. You're a retired general officer. You've got a perspective. Talk a little bit about how the center is transforming based on your experience to, again, create the conditions necessary, educational conditions necessary to make the things we've been talking about here real.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I can get you a lanyard. So, the whole of society, when you're sitting back, you realize we heard joint, we heard combine, we hear allies and partners, and the whole of society interagency. And that's what we bring at APCSS, is that here, even journalists attend some of our programs. So having that ability, and many of our allies and partners do not have militaries, so they have border patrol, police. They come and join that conversation, and it changes the way in which our fellows take a look at the problem set, which I think is really important. And this idea of investing in those leaders, we've also shifted. You know, of the 16,000 alumni, 2,300 have become either prime ministers, chiefs of defense, service chiefs, deputy service chiefs, senior leaders. And we shifted a little bit. The second year, we've done the Senior Enlisted Leader Subject Matter Expert Exchange. I just share this because the majority of all of our forces, allies and partners, are made up of our enlisted force. And really for most of the 30 years, 28 years, it's been focused on not necessarily on the majority of our force, those who implement those concepts that our officers create. And we had an amazing group of 70 senior enlisted leaders in all of your countries and more. And we had SEAC Black come, Fleet ISOM, the senior enlisted leader at Indo-PACOM, conceived of this idea, as well as the senior enlisted leader from Australia joined us, and many of your other countries. Japan, all came. And I think it was very empowering when we shift and look back to be more whole of community in terms of whole of force, to look at where we are shifting, because we need to sharpen the spears of everyone, not just the officer leaders, but the entire total force. And so it's been great to kind of step back and be able to reflect and to understand that those non-governmental organizations that sometimes do not get consulted until the point of necessity when you're on the ground, we need to do it beforehand. We need to have those conversations beforehand. And this is the time and place where we can do that. And I think that's very important. I want to just mention, it's just interesting, you know, we've had 57 defense chiefs. I just want to name these numbers. 115 chiefs and deputy chiefs of service, pretty significant, and 9 ministers of defense, you know, at APCSS. And that is the reason why the Secretary of Defense, Honorable Pete Hegseth, made his first address to the region, to our alumni, with hundreds of alumni from 63 countries from APCSS in March. And he gave a message that I think everyone was waiting, our allies and partners in the room, that America first doesn't mean America alone. It means that we need to invest in our allies and partners so that we can rise together. And I think that was so refreshing. But in that audience, also we had interagency community members, people who needed to hear and understand the direction of the United States Department of Defense. And of course, many of you were there, and thank you for being there. But I think that's the perspective I come with now, and that joint interagency, I think, and combined, so critical and important.
Well, that plays right into the first question we have from the audience. And so the question, and this really is for everyone, and we'll start off here with General Val. The question has to do with lethality through interoperability, and specifically focusing on allies and partners. There's a second part I'll ask in a minute, but if you'd start that off, and then we'll move it to the group.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. Lethality through interoperability.
Yeah.
Okay, if you take the 3 facets, human, technical, procedural, we've been talking human here of late, where you don't build trust at the line of departure. So you're more lethal if I understand my partners at the leadership levels that I work with. And so building relationships through pathways, the iterative, reiterative touch points we have with our partners and our allies is decisive to build that. Point 1. I'd say lethality through technical interoperability, if we get it right, helps us collectively share a sensor network to provide INW, to detect and to track, and to have distributed formations that, if we need to, could engage those targets. It's not just a stovepipe of US or a stovepipe of Japan or a stovepipe of Australia. If we were truly interconnected, truly interoperability with technical means, we would share common data. We have a common single pane of glass. And we could have ingested intelligence to make rapid information to our leaders and our commanders so they can help us and make the decisions necessary. I would think that's where we want to be objectively. We are not here yet. We have some other issues on classification that's just an excuse more than a reason that we've got to get through. And then lastly, I'd say procedural, just how do we plan the operations process? How do we execute current operations? How do we forecast for future operations and plans? Do we do it in a similar doctrine, in a similar way? Our South Pacific nations adopted New Zealand, Australian doctrine, which is a little bit different than U.S. doctrine. So from a procedure standpoint, how do we have common doctrinal language in the procedures? I lead to, if we were common in that way, not saying that's the example, but more common in that way, we'd be more lethal because we'd be able to understand, have the same systems thought process, and reach conclusions rapidly and disseminate the orders, messages, and procedures we need to execute. So if I look at it that way, there is a nexus between the two. Lethality with good interoperability with our allies and partners. That would be decisive.
General Glenn?
If I could, I was just thinking about the answer they gave to the last two. I did, disclosure, don't tell anybody in the Marine Corps, but I came from the HR enterprise before I came into this job. And maybe a blinding flash of the obvious, but what did we learn, not just in our transformed units, what did we learn from young Marines who were concluding their first enlistment? And the earlier you ask them, the more impactful it is. But if you ask them, do you enjoy what you do? Have you been exposed to something in the course of this year, 2 years, that perhaps you think you would be better at or would enjoy more? It injects the passion into the job, and not only does it raise the readiness of the unit, you get the resilience because the family wants to stay alongside of it too. And so many of the changes that we are still trying to undertake, policy-wise, are ones that allow us to, despite the best intentions of recruiters and all the testing we do on the front end, gives them the flexibility to get into the job that they want to do at a point in their career when they want to do it, and then we build the systems, and this is where we're still hung up. We build the systems that now I'm an E5, and you're telling me I got to go back to school to learn my MOS with E2s, E1s? Like, no, that wasn't part of the deal, right? Anyway, just something I was reminded of when the two of you were answering that question. To the point about lethality and interoperability, especially as it relates to allies and partners, the one thing I know General Clark and I have talked about this, that I've learned in this role, we've been at this long enough together against the threat of the moment that it's really not that useful to talk about in generalities. And what do I mean? With Simon sitting right next to you, when you say lethality, what do you mean by lethality? What is it you want to achieve that you think we can work together on? Right? We don't, United States Marine Corps in this theater, don't have a partner who doesn't say, can you help us with our maritime domain awareness? What do you mean by maritime domain awareness? Are we talking 2 miles? Are we talking 22 miles? And once we do that, what is it now about the interoperability? What is it you want to do with that? Are we going to enable your Coast Guard to go intercept it and conduct a maritime interdiction operation? Or are we talking about trying to close some kind of kill chain, kill web with an inherent weapon system? All of those are challenging scenarios we find now. And so being specific about what we're trying to achieve, mostly because all of our legacy systems, just the ones between he and I, are hard enough to make them work, to share the data and information necessary to close a U.S. kill web. And so when we start pulling allies and partners into it, it's another level of pain that makes us appreciate it that much more. So I would just say being specific, some specificity about what we mean.
Yeah, I was going to say, sir, even before we even get to the interoperability, if we look at what's required here in the Pacific, and earlier we talked about sustainment, even within the Army, the permeability between the precision and the specificity we need, not just from the active force, but what's going to be required from the Guard and specifically the reserves when it comes to sustainment, because all three compos will be needed in this region. And being more specific on what is required, not just what's laid out in an O plan, but to your point, actually naming it and saying, okay, this is what you're going to be required to do. I think we need to get at that permeability within the Army before we even look at the interoperability.
Yeah, interesting. The other part of the question that was posed here, I'd like to, again, I'll start with Susie, work our way backwards, is what can industry do to help in this regard?
Well, thanks for that. So one of the things that we're doing to pivot and is looking at the defense industrial base. We heard that being brought up, supply chain resilience, production. How can we partner with our allies and partners? So we're really excited that we're going to launch our first course, Pivoting to the Need, this fall, the defense industrial base, looking at acquisition professionals to take a look at where are the production needs, where are the supply chain gaps, where are the policy gaps that need to be addressed, so that we can level and understand. So the PIPER, the Partners in the Indo-Pacific Resilience group, will be joining. So we'll be recruiting, strategic recruiting from those who are in the acquisition world. And so that's something that where the industry are critical to understand what is possible, but not just within the U.S. industry, but our allies and partners. We're going to go to Australia, Japan, and take a look at, where are the industry partners there, and how do they address the issues. We know Australia and Japan have a course that they run, but it's specifically for Australia and Japan. But how do we do this in an ally and partner construct where we can look at the critical munitions issues? We can look at those areas whether it's batteries, whether it's, so I think industry becomes critical to understand the challenges and the gaps. And particularly when you're talking about exchanging with allies and partners and the complex environment that goes with it. But we won't get into it here because it's a lot. But I think it's important, though, that we address it and run to the problem rather than run away from it. I think through education and understanding and developing those leaders who can deal with those issues, I think is very important.
General Rampey, with respect to building readiness, how can industry help you in the work that you're doing?
Oh, I think in two ways. I'll talk systems and then talk people. And really industry partnering with them to how do we modernize some of our legacy systems, get smarter about even things that we can do internal with our own Power BI apps and capabilities without having to spend extra dollars, but also industry being more precise on what we need that capability to do and helping us de-scope. Some of us are buried under these contracts that have so many different partners, you don't even understand how we got to where we're at with some of our legacy systems. And having fun just kind of de-scoping some of that and going, I need this precise capability, I don't need any other gadgets, I don't need anything hooked to it, and helping us be more precise with that when it comes to our IT infrastructure and our systems. That's one way. When it comes to people, a more recent example is when we decided as an Army, we are going to reimagine the recruiter. And so when we thought, we have this recruiting issue, we need to reimagine our recruiting enterprise, and we started with industry. And so we said, hey, we're going to build this in flight. We're not sure how it's going to look, but we want to build a process, a system around a recruiter. Have you ever bought a car? You walk in, you pick out the car, the smiling person, they're like, yeah. Someone who looks like General Clark. They're like, yeah, come on in here. We got you in. You hook them, and he's like, I got the car. Sir, I know you smile. I got the car. And then they put you in a back room with someone else. I need the guy on the front room who can sell it, who can get you in. Someone else can do the paperwork. And so when we reimagined the recruiters, our first group of 42 Tangos is their new MOS, we went out to partners, Amazon, Deloitte, 10 others, and we said, hey, we've got a proposition. We don't want to give you any money, but we want to give you some soldiers, and we'd like you to take them to work for 30 to 60 days, let them glean from you. How do you recruit? How do you do talent acquisition with a blank slate, and then bring them back to our schoolhouse and help us build that program of instruction? And so 10 different partners in industry allowed us to spread out over 40 soldiers who have now graduated the first class and are now writing that program of instruction to train the next group of talent acquisitioners. So those are two examples.
It's going to be exciting to watch how those people perform and what, as you compare and contrast with the great efforts that were put in place before with these newly trained people and how they approach a job. General Glenn, industry, how can they help you?
Innovate, scale, speed. Innovate. We always get asked, what are your requirements? Define the requirement, put in a requirements document. When you can't see beyond the next two ridge lines technologically, help us help you. What's in the realm of dreamable right now that we can innovate on? Scale. We own plenty of equipment for which there are only OEM parts that are the only thing we can do to maintain that equipment. And since those parts are made in such isolated places, then we have to ship them all over the world. If I can tie it back to this morning's thing, we do not need any of that. If you can create a part and provide the plan, and we can back to jobs people can move into. I was in California last week with 3 Marines that 3D manufactured out of a rust-proof alloy a brake caliber for the ACV, for the Armored Amphibious Combat Vehicle. We got to be able to do that, and we need to be able to do that in Australia. We need to be able to do that, in every partner nation, so that we don't have to have these supply chains. And then the speed. You've heard it from every panel and speaker since we've been here. We, the components of Indo-PACOM, are trying to move. We're moving as fast as we can, and we're trying to move faster. And so anything that helps us move faster, anything that shortens our processes, anything that allows us to put information in a system once and it proliferates, that's really compelling. And those are the things that immediately come to mind.
Okay, Jennifer.
I'll probably get over my ski tips on this one, but I'll reverse it. What are your incentives in industry? That's if it's gonna be marketable, you're gonna make a profit from it, which you should go for. No rubbing against that. How do we help incentivize you to invest in that? So a couple different examples. SBIR, not the space-based infrared, but the Small Business Initiative. There's, through that mechanism with small businesses through defense, there are venues where if you get to innovation, we quite frankly have had a lot of success with smaller formations, smaller industry that tend to be on more of the cutting edge of technology for ISR, for computing, for cloud, et cetera, for helping us with data problems. You tend to get that much more rapid. Part of that is our requirements. Are we communicating that effectively with those sergeants in the motor pool or those lieutenants who are much more digital natives, not like the digital immigrants, Luddites that I represent? Are they able to talk through that and make sure there's a solution in that example? But maybe controversial, I point a lot of those fingers back at us and how we promote industry to solve our problems. If there's not an investment mechanism, I can only imagine, not to name names, but GM or Lockheed or whomever is not going to be incentivized to help fast enough, other than the goodness of their heart as veterans or they want to serve their country too. I get that. We all have friends in industry. But we've got to figure out how to communicate that better, how to put our people with industry, tie that with the acquisition community better. It's hard. It's a challenge we've seen at USARPAC because there's lots of great ideas. We have a lot of need. We know what a lot of those gaps and requirements are. And then you talk speed, Jim. We don't have time to mess around with long lead times. We have time to make prototypes fail quick, but get it out. It's not wasteful. If at the end you save money by figuring out how to get there faster, we've got to field it. If you think 2027 is the mid-stake in the engagement area where we've all been told to be ready, that's just a little over 24 months from now. And so how are we going to fill some of these gaps in that time? We've got to go real fast. And we've got to, lastly, be happy with good enough and less the perfect. A lot of the stuff we have in the Army is very exquisite, very precise, very fragile, and there can be very brittle. That's not helpful. It's not. And so if we have resiliency, we have the forward additive manufacturing with different capabilities. We can do that with common parts. We have multiple partners that make and manufacture things forward in different countries, including munitions. You save us the pain of having to bring it forward. You save us the pain of trying to save rounds and munitions for our partners who don't have it. They're making it forward. And I think all of those in that rubric of how can we help communicate that better is as much a problem on us in the military writ large as much as we need to have you listen a little bit more to our requirements.
I could talk about this for a really long time. Now, having been on this side, I won't do that in this panel, but I tell you, General Brown, something to consider would be a panel on this topic where you have industry and you've got warfighters and educators talking back and forth about it, because there's the whole what's in the art of the possible, what's really needed, and when and how it's got to be delivered quickly with scale, et cetera. Great answers here. I want to shift the topic of discussion just for a minute based on one of the questions we've got here. It has to do, we talk about readiness, but where in the world are you watching and learning as indicators of what you need to do differently to be more ready against threats, watching application of different technologies or different tactics, techniques, and procedures? And I'll start with you, General Val, and we'll walk back across.
I'll start with two examples. Matt McFarland, First Corps Commander, and I both had the opportunity to command CJTF OAR. Having that privilege and being shot at by a lot of new systems that are mass-produced, very precise at very great distances, and can mass against you, which we had no great response for and still don't across from a protection scheme standpoint, is eye-opening when you have a surveillance strike capability that you put hundreds up if you want to. Why do you need a lot of cannon artillery when I can throw a lot of loitering munitions up and save time and space, and you've got a lot of time to move when something stays up in the air for a very long time? Or an offensive deliberate planning processes and deliberate strikes, you know exactly how to mass on that target. It's very hard for current defenses to stop some of that. We see that, you know, I had some experience with that, unfortunately, but you see that at scale in Ukraine, and where you don't have, within a 12-week cycle, is about as much technology advantage as you have. The innovation is so rapid forward, so rapid that neither side has a comparative advantage technologically. We're now flying drones with fiber optic cables to defeat the jamming schemes and mechanisms in the electromagnetic spectrum, which is pervasive. Both Matt and I saw that against our ISR in Syria and Iraq. It's pervasive. And so if you aren't hardened, you can't see, sense, and understand and have reliable data to make decisions to strike or to protect, just from the ISR scheme alone. So we're seeing those things. We're seeing the fact that in an era of persistent surveillance, if you mass your formations into a headquarters with any size or strength, it's going to die. The RF energy alone can be soaked up, and it looks so unique that we can strike it. That's a headquarters. I'm going to kill the headquarters. I'm going to go after the command and control systems architecture that controls the fight of my adversary. I'm going to do it all day, all night. If I can't degrade it, disrupt it, defeat it, I'm going to destroy it. So if you're not disaggregated and separated and dispersed with the ability to mass your effects without sin of concentrating together, you see that in Ukraine everywhere. I don't know the last number of Russian generals and colonels who have been killed. It's in the hundreds because they got inside these large headquarters. They learned the bad lessons from us in coin on bases with 37 tents at a brigade headquarters and 45 generators. Like, that's dumb. So we see that sorry if you're selling that, I'm sorry. We need to be able to command and control small form factors, very mobile, in the air, on the ground, and disperse rapidly. You're going to be seeing persistent surveillance. So we see that as a great challenge, offense and defense operations for large-scale combat operations. But we've got to go back to some basics to help us with that. Passive protection measures, digging in the earth, practicing our displacement drills, shooting and moving. Those things do matter to this day, and I think that helps.
General Glenn, what are you watching?
Yeah, because he did such a thorough job, I was sitting here trying to think about, giving you another, just a different perspective. Because of the nature of the littoral operational environment, we pay particular attention to partners and allies who have lived in these kinds of environments forever. So let's go out of the region, and there's plenty within, but like in the high north, the Norwegians, the Swedes, against a near peer competitor, folks that have, the Russians who have capability in electromagnetic spectrum, and what kind of equipment, what kind of techniques, what kind of, and all those folks are contributing to the Ukraine informational effort in terms of preparing folks. So I think that's one place where we pay close attention. The other one, just to call it out again, is in those locations, and because we live in this AO, I mean within the region, where folks are engaged, and Admiral Paparo commented this morning that the first fight's going to be in the cyber and space environment. I would argue that there's jousting going on far more regularly than most of us know. And so how are people contending with that now? And how can it inform the things that we need to prepare to be doing or be prepared to do more of to have our own effect in it?
General Rampey, so how does it affect talent management? I mean, is there an aspect of this that gets translated down into the work you're doing? How does it affect the way you think about the talent that we've got to grow in?
Yeah, I think, hearing you talk about earlier about transformation and contact and that agility, and I think we talk about it sometimes that it's just a phase. Hey, we're going to have this unit that's going to test X. And I think from now on, we are transforming in contact. It's not a phase, it's a way of life for our Army. And so then how do I help deliver the right talent that can affect that? And so that is leaning forward rather than waiting for an Army structure change. It's leaning forward and having that conversation with the G3 Force Management. We had a month before, this transformation order that came out, and it's trying to see an issue before it's on paper. It's delivering readiness to the 25th ID here in theater before it's on paper. I'm changing orders and I'm sending 13 mics here, even though I have no structure to go against, because it's the right thing to do. And so it's leaning forward with that and understanding that transformation and contact is not just a phase, but it is it's a way of life. And me having to go back to the Human Resources Command where hey, if there's not a line and block chart, if there's not a hole to put a peg in, how am I going to do that? Well, we're going to do it, and we're going to figure it out. And so it's how does industry deal with some of that, and how do we quickly find the data we need? What are those data elements? How does industry do it so quickly to really identify that talent that's out there, and maybe not the right MOS or the right rank, but it's the right person at the right time to provide that transformation that's needed.
It's interesting how you kind of tied that back into the discussion of speed. It's not something we've always related to our personnel development process, but things are moving so fast. If you don't think of it that way, we miss the mark potentially. It's all kinds of educational implications. Your thoughts?
No, absolutely. I think I like what General Glenn said. The speed of combat, not the speed of contract, right? So it's the ability to address the issues. But with that, you have to understand the environment. And I think besides the educational opportunities of understanding one another, building those relationships, are the reflections that we get. Creating the environment so we can understand what our needs of our allies and partners are and how they're perceiving what we are doing and how we're doing it so we can adjust. I think that's very critical. We just recently had Maluhia talks run by OSD at the Assistant Secretary level with various countries in the region to get their views, very specific views, and General Glenn talked about the specificity of those views rather than maritime domain awareness. What does that mean? Well, information sharing that's more transparent. A lot of these very specific things and asks, and the range of capabilities and desires range drastically with 36 nations, 14 time zones. You're not going to have the same with those allies and partners. So understanding that complexity is this environment, educational environment, allows that if we're listening and if we're willing to take those reflections and share it out. Sometimes, we go in, we understand it on an individual unit level, but I think we need to more broadly share this. So not just the U.S. understands it, but our close allies and partners, we're sharing this information. And that's one of the things that came out from this Maluhia talks is feel like we do a lot of activities together, but we don't close the deal. In other words, share that information at the end so we really understand what the needs are and really what's not helpful. And when you bring everyone together in a forum like this, or even at any of our organizations, at APCSS, we brought in space guardians from Indo-PACOM. And there's only a few of them there, really. But they said, wow, this is like the watering hole. I've got 35 nations right here. I can find out about the space condition or how each country is looking at space forces. Do they have policies? How do they view it? All in one place. And I think leveraging events like this where we can understand each other, that's why I think it's events like this where we can network and understand and share those reflections out are important to the educational process.
So, first off, I told you it's a rich topic, and you can see across this panel the many ways you could come about this and answer the questions of how you achieve readiness. But let's go one last thought for about a minute from each one of you. And General Val, if you'd start.
Sure. In the pursuit of excellence, there is no finish line. So we keep striving to provide better capabilities in the hands of our soldiers and leaders so they are more lethal, they are more capable. I am convinced, in the short time I've been back into USARPAC in the theater, I get to travel around when my boss lets me go, and I have been really impressed at the soldiers and leaders at the small unit formations and our operational leaders across the theater. So we talk about resilience in the human domain. I don't look at it as a Generation Z or Millennial or Y or anything like that. I guarantee you, I'll make this bet. The chips are down, they will perform. There's an innate number of skills that a lot of these troops have, regardless of where they come from or their background or how they've been trained, that's going to pop out, and we're going to take advantage of it in a crisis. I sleep soundly, if I can use that analogy again, knowing that that's out there, knowing that the people that we have are truly fantastic. And for old people like me who have less time in uniform in front of me than I do the 34 years behind me, it's refreshing to know, to be confident that that's still there.
Great point. General Grant.
Probably not new, but just some reminders that things that have surprised me in the last 6 months, the pace of change. The pace on change on both sides of the equation, quite honestly, probably less than 90 days. The situation that we had previously been talking about has adapted in some tangible way that requires us to reconsider whether we're going to continue doing what we're doing or not. So that's where the imperative comes from, and I hope it's coming through from all of us so far. Two, your collective ability to contribute to the asymmetries. I think the genius in transforming in contact in force design is that we are presenting asymmetries, meaning things that the adversary, the Chinese Communist Party, have not considered. And so it changes the calculus. And that has to continue. To JB's point, it's a journey, not a destination. I think the frustration of our headquarters is that certainly I'll speak for our headquarters. They're like, hey, would you just set the requirement and stick with it so we can field it? I'm like, if I was the only one voting, I would. But it turns out there's the other side of this equation, and it's changing. And the last one is teamwork. And yes, the joint teamwork, I'm going to finish with that, but here's what I've found about industry in the short time here. Your ideas and the products you're coming forward with most often are good enough. And good enough, quite honestly, is good enough. So what's my encouragement? Come out here with 10, plan to take 3 of them home and leave the other 7 with us collectively. We'll break them all, and we'll give you the feedback on what it's going to take, and who knows, we might just fight tonight, and that might be the difference maker. And go home with your 3, scrape all the data off of it, do what you need to do to give us the next version, and the next unit, the next brigade, we'll have the haves and the have-nots, and we'll manage the feud between the Hatfields and McCoys about who's better because they got version 2 and you're still working on version 1. That's ours to take care of. The final one is what brought me here today. Just know that on this end, complete confidence, like JB said. You want to go tonight? Let's go tonight. We will win because of the teamwork, because of the capability of our youngest, the youngest out there, who will absolutely bring it. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Great. General Rampy.
I'll jump on the word used, change. Change is constant, and I think in the people space is being comfortable with change. For those of us that have been in a few years, it's being comfortable that those coming behind us have a choice, whether it's in a marketplace, how their talent is managed. It's not a bad thing, and change shouldn't have a negative connotation. And just encourage that open talk, whether it's in the marketplace, whether it's changing career fields, because now you can change your career field, change your branch based on the needs of the Army and not necessarily be stuck in one branch or one functional area. And I just ask that we counsel, we coach individuals that we need you, part of the force, and we want the talent that you're willing to provide in whatever capacity that is.
Thank you. Ms. Barzon.
I just want to jump on the idea of the asymmetric advantage. Our allies and partners are our asymmetric advantage. Our partners, including our industry partners, all of our interagency partners, the people that we work in communities and across the region. And we need to invest in those relationships. And as I tell every class that comes, I've only had 2 since I've only been there 4 months. But anyway, what I tell them is that you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. That means that in our little enclaves, when we come in, we all sit together by our uniforms around the countries. I just challenge everyone here, as I challenge all of the courses that come through, that you'd be willing to extend a hand, because it starts now, not at the moment of conflict or combat, but it starts right now, where we exchange cards, we talk, we understand, we try to share our perspectives. And so I just urge everyone, what a great opportunity here at AUSA to do this, and General Clark for USARPAC, to show that we are closer and we're stronger together. It's peace through strength, and that's what this is all about.
I'd like to thank the audience for your participation through the questions that you have. And as I said before we began, this conversation doesn't stop here. These questions can still be asked. These people have answers, and they want to hear from you. Can I get a round of applause for this panel?
Thanks, JD. Good one, man. Yep.
Great talk.
JD, you were right. This was an all-star panel. I'm going to tell you, in 12 years of LANPAC, this is the best panel I've seen. Unbelievable. So let's hear it again for the panel. Tremendous job. Definitely capture their picture there. We can put them up as #1 panel, no doubt. Hey, thanks. It's been a great first day. Enjoy Waikiki this evening. And we'll see you 8 o'clock, 0800 in the exhibit hall is chow. Okay, chow ops. We do that pretty well, breakfast. And then 0900, a real treat, Dr. John McManus, a brilliant historian and expert on the Indo-Pacific, will be here as our first keynote. So 0800, breakfast, 9 o'clock, keynote. See you tomorrow. Thanks.